Hello, everyone from Los Angeles. I want to first extend my thanks to the Price College of Business and, of course, to Dr. Adriana Sanford, the wizard both behind as well as in front of the curtains for this forum. I am very honored to be part of this important collaborative effort to share information and insight on the extraordinary times in which we find ourselves. And as Dr. Sanford noted, I am a career federal prosecutor. And as that, I am going to talk about what I know best, which is crime and the criminal justice system during the pandemic, and what the last 5 months trends and patterns hold for the future and what lessons we can learn. I will say that having heard from some of the prior speakers, including Jose, a lot of the themes are consistent about resilience. The resilience of the human spirit. And you'll see from my recorded PowerPoint presentation, that resilience, fortunately or unfortunately, goes across the board. It goes across the board to organized criminal groups, which have adapted during the time of pandemic to diversify the way they conduct and commit their existing crimes, but they've also diversified to COVID-inspired crimes. And as, of course, law enforcement and the criminal justice system have each also adapted. I will say that the views that I express in the recorded presentation are those that I hold in my personal capacity and not in any of my official roles with the Department of Justice. Thank you. The prefix pan means all of everything or involving all members, and perhaps never before has a word like pandemic been such an apt descriptor, as the coronavirus has affected every part of the world in some shape or form and every strata of society. The pandemic has had far-reaching implications on the global economy, criminal patterns and practices, and the manner in which law enforcement investigates crime and the criminal justice system charges and processes defendants. While it is easy for doom and gloom given what we have been through and given the uncertainty for the future, all is not lost, but we must adapt to new world realities which likely are here to stay. The criminal justice system has already pivoted in some ways, and the responses to the pandemic have led to some modern changes and increased efficiencies, and some cynics might say even unintended reform. Governments globally have taken drastic measures to limit the spread of the disease, instituting international border closures, the mandatory closure of non-essential businesses, and shelter-in-place orders of varying strictness. Legal economic activity has drastically declined, which has affected the illegal global economy because cartels and criminal syndicates use the legal global supply chain and trade channels to move their illegal merchandise throughout the world. If there's less legal trade and business, there's less opportunity and less cover for criminals. This theme popped up on the internet not too long after the pandemic began. It plays off the popular Where's Waldo book series, where the goal is for the reader to pick out Waldo out of a crowd of people. Much like him in this meme, without the hustle and bustle of a crowd, a criminal has no cover he cannot hide, and he has less opportunities. Models predicting crime patterns look at routine activities and posit that crime requires a convergence of a motivated offender, a suitable target, and the absence of capable protectors in the same place at the same time. In short, without victims, there can be no offenders, and as more people stay indoors, opportunities for street crime decline. The pandemic's effects, however, go both ways, as law enforcement not only have had their resources and attention diverted to enforcing shelter-in-place orders, but their investigatory powers have also been partially sidelined. In fact, a few months back, one police department in Texas posted a tongue-in-cheek message on their website entitled "Crime Canceled," which asks that all criminals stop their activities until further notice. If only, right? Crime, of course, has not been canceled. While crime decreased in March and April after schools and businesses were first closed, criminals have continued to find ways to generate revenue during the pandemic by adapting and finding new routes and new methods to commit their crimes, and by diversifying to other crimes. Drug trafficking has been affected by the pandemic in the form of drug shortages on the streets, as regular trade and distribution chains have been disrupted, diminished purity in drugs as thin supplies are stretched with the addition of bunk ingredients, which make the drugs much more dangerous, as the more than 4,500 overdose deaths in Los Angeles in the last 5 months alone might be a reflection, and price hikes. Much of the precursor chemicals for methamphetamine and fentanyl trafficked by the Mexican cartels comes from Chinese laboratories and factories, including in Wuhan, and drug producers have struggled to source these chemicals, first due to the lockdown in China, and now with continued trade route disruptions. We can see the effects of these struggles in the pricing patterns for these two drugs. Starting in April 2020, there has been a sustained monthly price increase for wholesale quantities of methamphetamine. Wholesale pound, quarter pound, and ounce amounts have in fact doubled to quadrupled. Fentanyl prices have similarly increased at the wholesale level up to 1.5 times. During the pandemic, there have been two competing trafficker practice trends: stockpiling drugs given the inability to freely mingle the drugs with legal trade, and trafficker efforts to ramp up shipments as they worry about increased restrictions, both of which have led to an increased number of seizures and larger scale drug seizures. From May 1st, 2019 to May 31st, 2020, the total weight of cocaine, fentanyl, and marijuana seized in California each more than doubled, and the amount of heroin seized almost tripled. The frequency of seizure events of fentanyl tripled, with the frequency of heroin seizure events doubling. Maritime seizures have doubled compared to the same time frame in 2019, as the transportation of commercial goods has not seen the same widespread disruption as individual passenger transport. This increased maritime seizure trend extends to Europe, as seizure data collected from the main entry points of cocaine to the European Union by Europol suggests little or no disruption to the European cocaine supply chain. Organized crime groups are resilient and constantly adapt their modus operandi to the current situation, and they have been no different during this pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, 0.2% of drugs in the United States were mailed or ordered through the surface net and what we call the dark net, which is a network of secret websites that exist on an encrypted network, as drug trafficking is still a business built on relationships and in-person contact. What we have seen during the pandemic are the following shifts: less face-to-face dealings and less reliance on cash as a form of payment, and increased use of digital currencies such as Bitcoin. Increased use of secure encrypted communication applications such as EncroChat, social media, and surface web and darknet markets, as well as increased use of mail, parcel drops, and drones for sourcing and delivery. Use of the dead drop technique taken from the espionage business, where after the buyer transfers money to the seller provides coordinates to a location where the drugs are hidden for pickup. There have also been instances of criminals using falsified certificates, commercial vehicles, and corporate vests to impersonate food delivery workers or other key workers in order to deliver drugs. And we have especially seen this in Europe, including the United Kingdom. We've also seen disruption in money laundering activities as the primary methods of utilizing businesses for trade-based money laundering, which may involve falsifying documents and under or over invoicing the value of legitimate goods sold, and mingling illicit goods with legal trade, and the use of passenger air carrier and passenger vehicle carrier to physically transport drug proceeds, typically to drug sources in Mexico or China, have been affected by restrictions in travel and to businesses. What this disruption translates to on the streets are money stockpiles and large money seizures, as there has been a bottleneck of the proceeds here in the United States. In fact, the amount of currency seized within the California southern land border as of mid-May had already surpassed 2018 totals. If you want to see what $6 million in cash looks like, here it is. This is from a seizure off a privately chartered flight, as money launderers also have shifted to this mode of transport. Another way that money launderers have adapted to these disruptions is through the use of money mule schemes. It starts off with you receiving an email, maybe through an online job site or a dating website. You provide your bank account information and allow money transfers to flow through your account. Or you see this ad on Craigslist about an opportunity to make money during the pandemic. You end up moving the money either virtually or physically, and you get paid a little cash for your trouble. Sounds easy, even profitable, but the problem is that you have just acted as a so-called money mule, which will land you in prison. We've also seen the increased use of United States citizens at the port of entries. While United States citizens can continue to cross the border, Mexican nationals now have fewer opportunities to legally enter the United States. Under current restrictions, the only Mexican nationals who can cross the border are those legally working in the United States, seeking medical treatment, attending school, or conducting official government business. With schools remaining closed and state restrictions limiting business operations during COVID, the cartels have fewer Mexican nationals they can recruit as drug couriers. Perhaps the ultimate adaptation is the rise of new COVID-inspired crimes, though with every crisis or mass disaster, we have seen these scams or frauds in some form or another. They include imposter scams, investor scams, product scams, particularly related to personal protective equipment or so-called immunity pills or cures, or fake home test kits, all of which prey on people's fears about getting sick or dying. Benefits fraud, including using fraud to receive PPP loans, charities fraud, or cyber-related fraud, with this last category seeing a huge spike given that most of us are telecommuting and using technology to work and perform other life functions. There's also been an increase in existing types of crimes, including hate crimes, particularly against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, as the coronavirus spread has been attributed to China, Chinese Americans, or anyone who looks Asian. As of July 20th, there have been 310 mass shootings across the nation, a 34% increase compared to the same time period last year, more than 22,000 deaths by gun violence, and over 19,000 injuries nationwide. Research suggests a link between pandemic-led surges in gun sales and the rash of shooting incidents. Between March and May, there were 2 million more guns sold than were sold during the same months in prior years. And while homicides slightly dropped in the beginning months of the pandemic, the rate is rising again, with 177 homicides in Los Angeles as of August 7th, a 14% increase from last year. There's been an increase in family and domestic violence as people are restless and frustrated, and many are now unemployed and stuck at home, creating a powder keg situation. With the economic crisis, more people, including children, are out on the streets, making them particularly vulnerable to kidnapping by human trafficking syndicates. We've seen an increase in online crimes given the 50 to 70% increased use of the internet, including sextortion, identity theft, and Zoom bombing, the latter of which often involves streaming child abuse materials to traumatize young children. There's been a rise in commercial burglaries due to businesses left vacant, and an increase in vehicle thefts, record highs for Los Angeles, more than at any time in at least a decade, as the coronavirus has left more vehicles on city streets, with owners obeying stay-at-home orders. The number of traffic-related deaths in Los Angeles increased alarmingly after the first month of stay-at-home orders due to the surge of speeding on emptier streets and the higher number of people walking and riding bikes in neighborhoods. We've also seen organized crime groups taking on duties of the state, such as enforcing lockdown orders and providing basic services by delivering perishable food, canned goods, toilet paper, and PPE to the poor, infirm, and older adults. Organized crime groups like the Italian Mafia and the Japanese Yakuza have been doing this for decades, but they, of course, do it with their own flair. Drug cartels have posted warnings about abiding by curfews and social distancing rules, which include references to torture and murder as penalties for scofflaws. The Sinaloa cartel drug lord El Chapo's enterprising daughter formed the company El Chapo 701, with a 701 referring to the rank her father once held on the Forbes list of the world's richest people. While it has sold everything from fashion to beer in her father's name and likeness, the company shifted to manufacturing PPE and pandemic-related items, which employees of the company have been handing out on the streets in staged PR events. Organized crime groups perform these functions without being asked by the state because it helps to reinforce their soft power. They become seen as a protectorate of the people, coming to the help of the poor and succeeding where the state has been failing. These tactics have served as highly effective propaganda in Mexico, where in certain parts El Chapo has been seen as Robin Hood helping the poor. What the trends and patterns in crime and criminal behavior have shown us in the last few months is that while COVID may have effects, criminals have found ways and will continue to find ways to adapt and to take advantage of new opportunities. With respect to law enforcement, the partial shift in operational focus to public order policing has temporarily reduced the availability of personnel to perform investigative and intelligence work. Due to both COVID and local civil unrest, many narcotics teams have been temporarily reassigned, leading to an unprecedented decline in narcotics enforcement in the Los Angeles region. Arrests have been prioritized to minimize law enforcement from getting sick through contact with the public. Law enforcement has had less ability to conduct ground operations, such as surveillance or hand-to-hand informant-driven transactions. And there have also been reports of less information sharing within the European Union and across countries in the world. The official law enforcement response to COVID here in the United States includes the Department of Justice coordinating nationwide efforts to combat COVID-related crimes starting in March, including with the creation of a hoarding and price gouging task force, and reach outs to vulnerable communities such as the elderly about COVID scams. Some examples from Department of Justice prosecutions include those involving investor scams about fake COVID-19 cures and individuals fraudulently obtaining PPP loans, which are then used for stock market ventures, gambling, or expensive Vegas getaways. Courts themselves have also had to adapt to the COVID pandemic, responding to local and national health conditions and numbers. Federal courts, including here in Los Angeles, have issued general orders which have shut down jury trials and grand juries, closed the courthouses to the public, and changed entry protocol into court facilities when they have been reopened. Orders have also changed the manner in which hearings are conducted, as they have gone mostly virtual or telephonic, and courtesy copy requirements have been eliminated. Here in Los Angeles, while we have had grand juries resume since June with COVID safety protocols in place, we still have not had any jury trials since March. In June, a newly formed COVID-19 Judicial Task Force offered suggestions on new protocols to institute if and when jury trials resumed, and most of the protocols are already in place for grand jury presentations. We've also seen a change in the approach to requesting detention or bond on both the federal and local levels. Federally, prosecutors were directed to take into account the defendant's health conditions and whether they made them high risk for serious illness should they contract COVID, and considering whether it would be safer for them and the prison population to release them on bond rather than seek detention. On the state side, a zero bail policy was passed in Los Angeles County in an effort to reduce the spread of coronavirus in jails, as it eliminated the bail requirement for low-level felonies and misdemeanors. The Bureau of Prisons has instituted multi-phase modified operational plans, which include a testing protocol for inmates and staff and tracking positive COVID results and deaths. And as we have seen, no one is untouchable from COVID. Moises Escamilla May, one of Mexico's most notorious cartel bosses who beheaded 12 people, who was serving a 37-year sentence in a maximum security prison in Jalisco, died in May after contracting the coronavirus. Closer to home, as of August 15th, 113 inmates have died from COVID-19. The CARES Act, which was passed in March 2020, provided $2 trillion in economic relief and granted the Bureau of Prisons more power to release an inmate on home confinement in lieu of incarceration based on each inmate's specific health risk factors to COVID. This extends to both release while waiting for trial and conversion of post-conviction sentences to home confinement or outright sentence reductions. As of August 15th, 7,504 inmates have been placed on home confinement as a response to the pandemic. The Riverside County Jail devised a pandemic plan with a goal to reduce overall capacity in their facilities, to increase physical distancing, Since February, there had already been a 16% drop in the average inmate population. For some, this has been seen as an unwanted consequence of the pandemic, while for many others, the reduction in the prison population has been a long time coming and still too small of a move toward reducing mass incarceration. The effects on the criminal justice system have been wide-ranging in how we investigate cases, including the manner in which we submit process, as most process, such as search warrant applications, are now not only filed electronically, but also sworn out by agents with judges telephonically rather than in person. Our ability to charge cases has been affected by the closure of grand juries and made us rethink whether to proceed by way of proving probable cause in a preliminary hearing before a judge instead. When we have had grand juries, we have rethought the length of our presentations, changed the layout of the grand jury room, and instituted other safety protocols. As already discussed, the approach to seeking detention has been modified. The pandemic has affected the ability of counsel to meet with their clients in prison, as visits have been heavily curtailed and replaced by additional phone privileges. Meetings and interviews between prosecutors, defense counsel, and defendants in custody also have been delayed and conducted by video or phone when jail facilities have been able to arrange for them. The manner in which we file pleadings and conduct motions practice has also changed, including the elimination of hard copy courtesy copies to the court. While a handful of judges have insisted on holding in-person hearings, most have been conducted using video applications or by phone. In terms of plea offers, prosecutors have been offering COVID variances, resulting in more lenient offers for more minor felony offenses. And for sentencings, prosecutors have agreed to extensions of self-surrender dates or even probationary sentences for certain defendants at high risk for COVID. All of these changes begs the question, has COVID-19 had the unintended benefit of ushering us into a more modern criminal justice system with less paper and the use of more technology? Only time will tell, but virtual hearings and maybe even virtual jury trials may be the wave of the very near future. To conclude, I hope that the takeaway from this presentation is that as with every crisis, COVID has provided the opportunity for the resilience of the human spirit, whether that be the criminal or the law-abiding spirit, the civilian or law enforcement spirit, to be on full display. The adaptations we have witnessed from individual actors and groups and the criminal justice system itself may become more the norm than we think. That is, until at least the next crisis.
You gave us a great background on what's going on and those money mules and the importance of paying attention, which is something that a lot of students don't realize and a lot of parents. You can have a great role in a company and it can be a great company. That doesn't mean that the person above you is not actually doing something illegal on the side.
So I will say, first of all great points. I hate to say this, but crime is really literally everywhere. And if it seems too good to be true, frankly, it is too good to be true. And so you talked a lot about these letters, online scams, emails, telephone calls. They literally come from everywhere. And while you could be in Los Angeles, Adriana, the perpetrator likely is halfway across the world. And so that is sort of the connectivity for all of us, which could also be bad, right? Not always necessarily good. And so, of course, everybody should be aware. We've tried to do some outreach. The elderly, for example, get targeted a lot. You talked about kids as well. With respect to transnational crime and just crime in general, again, it is everywhere. And I had the pleasure of speaking this week to a class, and aerospace fraud, for example, is a very big prevalent crime, right? Because in the aerospace and defense industry, for example, there's a lot of big defense contracts with the government, sometimes millions, sometimes billions. And of course, that leads to potential fraud, embezzlement. There might be cover-ups in terms of what's going on. I believe Larry at the beginning had talked about the 737 MAX. We've all read the news about some of the issues that had happened. And frankly, a lot of it came to light only because of what we call whistleblowers within companies. And so part of it is all of us have a tremendous responsibility, regardless of title, what our role is in a company. You could be, the line employee, or you could be the CEO. Either way, all of us have to be diligent, look around to see what's happening. And if you see something that's happening that is illegal, you should report it, and you have to report it. And there are mechanisms in the government on the website, including Defense Department, Office of Inspector General, for example. So absolutely, crime, unfortunately, is everywhere. It could be under our noses, and we have a responsibility as leaders, as employees, to do something about it. I think we have both a moral duty as well as a legal duty. And oftentimes we think, Adriana, that if we don't do something affirmatively bad, we will be shielded. But the bottom line is sometimes omission of acts will actually cause us to get into legal trouble as well. And ultimately, it's all up to us, and companies function, and in order to function properly, we need for everybody to be doing their job and making sure other people are doing their jobs as well.